Thank you very much, Mr. Corey. Welcome back.
And good afternoon. Thank you, Chairman Frazier and members. I'm Richard Corey, Executive Officer of the Air Resources Board, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. So I'm going to focus on the action part of the plan. Our agency partners are identifying potential actions that could take to help achieve the vision, objectives, and targets in the action plan, and we work together to assemble a preliminary list for discussion at the public workshops, which start this week. It's important to note that the effectiveness of the plan and any actions that are identified are predicated on our work, ongoing work with stakeholders. We need to hear their ideas and concerns and to ensure the process is transparent. We also need to encourage hearing the full range of viewpoints, developing the most effective strategies, and integrating new and better information that becomes available as we move forward. This week's workshops are part of that process. After stakeholder input, we expect to revise and winnow down the list for consideration by the agencies. We'll also include proposed actions and an analysis of their potential impacts in the draft action plan for another round of public input. Thus, there are several steps to develop and refine the plan over the next several months. Each action would help advance one or more of the objectives for efficiency, pollution reduction, and competitiveness. Not every action would be expected to result in a positive impact on all three simultaneously. Some may be required to protect public safety, like some infrastructure fixes, while others are necessary to protect public health and meet federal law. A key benefit of the plan is laying out a comprehensive strategy in one place. Using a comprehensive approach that includes all actions will provide the greatest transparency to the affected industries and support an integrated economic analysis. The agencies expect to begin implementing the final action plan items within the next 5 years, but full implementation may extend over several decades as we evaluate and adapt to achieve the 2030 targets and the 2050 vision. Further, refinement and implementation of the actions in the plan will be subject to further public engagement. For the Resources Board, many of our contributions to the preliminary list are being considered as measures in the State Implementation Plan, or SIP, to achieve federal health-based air quality standards. In order to comply with federal law, the Resources Board needs to submit a plan to reduce certain types of pollution in areas that the U.S. Clean Air Act classifies as non-attainment areas. The SIP is due later this year for the Los Angeles and San Joaquin Valley and Sacramento regions. Potential SIP measures are undergoing a concurrent public process are included on the preliminary list at this stage so that they can be assessed along with the other potential actions not needed for federal compliance. This is important to ensure the plan presents a complete and clear picture of the activities the state undertakes that relate to the freight sector. It's also important to note that despite significant investments in substantial air quality gains, the vehicles and equipment used to transport cargo still account for half of the toxic diesel soot emissions across the state. And even though we've seen tremendous improvements, the highest cancer risks from air toxics are found in or near rail yards, ports, and roadways, often in environmental justice communities. The preliminary list of actions focuses on increasing the efficiency of the freight system, demonstrating and deploying advanced technology and alternative fuels, supporting infrastructure improvements, and addressing needs to reduce emissions and energy use at freight hubs. I'll provide some examples of the draft action plan in each of these categories. I'll start with efficiency. Efficiency improvements have the potential to support multi-agency environmental, energy, mobility, safety, and economic goals. In addition to positive air quality benefits, system efficiency improvements can produce business benefit. By implementing one or more efficiency strategies, businesses may be able to cut travel time, decrease fuel costs, and increase the capacity of the system to transport more freight within the existing footprint. Ms. Advis, in a moment, will describe the freight efficiency think tank convened by Caltrans to bring together experts from industry, academia, and government to help develop cross-cutting ideas to increase efficiency. Its recommendations are still emerging. Meanwhile, the agencies have identified some preliminary concepts, including changes in operational practices to reduce unproductive moves like trucks hauling empty containers or chassis, as well as evaluating longer or heavier trucks and trains to move more cargo within the existing infrastructure footprint. Possible efficiency strategies also include equipment and software technology solutions for trucking, rail, marine, and aviation. For trucking, they include intelligent transportation systems and platooning to better use our existing infrastructure, reduce wait time at truck scales and border crossings, and provide dynamic truck travel information to drivers on the most efficient routes to avoid both congestion and community impacts. For advanced technology and alternative fuels, the second focus area, the potential actions include development of more health protective emission standards for trucks, ships, and locomotives, and related cargo equipment by ARB, the federal government, or international bodies. They also include complementary initiatives, or rather incentives, to demonstrate cleaner technologies in real-world use to assist equipment owners with the incremental cost of cleaner equipment and the necessary fueling and charging infrastructure. Other potential actions include planning for greater use of electricity and hydrogen as freight transportation fuels, including standardized charging protocols, fueling infrastructure along the state's major freight corridors, projects to demonstrate vehicle-to-grid integration, and the steps to support use of renewable natural gas in freight operations. A more efficient zero and near-zero emission freight system will demand not only new equipment and fuels, but also new transportation infrastructure. But community acceptance of industry expansion often depends on the prospects for new local jobs, clean air, and safe operations. Actions identified in the Freight Action Plan will also address the need for workers trained to build, maintain, and operate the advanced equipment and communication systems. The third area of focus in the action plan is transportation infrastructure. Possible actions include safety enhancements for road, rail, and air travel, investigating the viability of toll roads on high-traffic freight corridors, expanding secure truck parking that includes plug-in capability to run the onboard amenities, increasing use of waterways and rail shuttles to inland ports, and expanding on-dock rail options at seaports to avoid truck trips entirely. Freight hubs will be a particular focus for infrastructure development and advanced technologies. To support increases in efficiency and reductions in pollution from freight hubs, potential actions include data collection and development of a freight handbook to offer best practices for the siting, design, and operation of freight facilities that promote public health, safety, quality, energy, and climate resiliency. We have also begun to coordinate with ports and industry partners to promote energy conservation and efficiency measures, renewable generation, and advanced technologies at these freight hubs. This is another area where we have much work to do with our agency and industry partners. Following the upcoming workshops, we'll be evaluating the ability of each of the proposed actions to further the objectives of the Sustainable Freight Action Plan, as well as the costs and benefits. While not every measure will advance all three priorities, the suite of state actions in the final plan taken together will. The pilot projects that Mr. Ajise will discuss in a moment provide an opportunity to demonstrate how we can combine all three elements into projects that provide innovative solutions to achieve the state's goals for sustainable freight. Using the response rate by industry and others as a measure, there's no shortage of creative, innovative ideas that can achieve the multiple goals that we all share. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Corey. Mr. Ajisi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members. Good afternoon. Glad to be here to talk about freight. As Ms. Inman would say, every day is freight day, so it's good to be here. The executive order identified the need to ensure progress towards a sustainable freight system. More specifically, the order identified the need to initiate work this year on corridor-level freight pilot projects within the state's primary freight corridors. The pilot projects will focus on integrating advanced technologies, alternative fuels, freight and fuel infrastructure, and local economic development opportunities. The agencies gathered around the table today are part of what we call the Interagency Work Group. The Interagency Work Group followed a very extensive outreach to get input from the public on the pilot projects. A statewide webinar was kicked off on October 1st, explaining the concepts needed and the concept needs and asking for pilot project ideas. The message was also reiterated at the California Freight Advisory Committee meeting last October. Pilot project nominations were due on November 30th. About 54 project concepts were identified. The pilot projects were analyzed based on the criteria in the executive order. Some project concepts made sense to combine along one corridor, and a preliminary list of 5 pilot concepts representing a very good cross-section of the state were agreed upon by the Interagency Committee or Interagency Group for further evaluation. These pilot concepts will also be shared with the public through workshops that are coming up. To meet the objectives of the executive order, the State Agency Work Group looked at the concepts from a number of perspectives. What are the potential for achieving measurable progress towards freight targets? We looked at the concepts for innovative features and potential for system transformation. We also looked at opportunities to provide integrated state agency support where possible, as well as the ability to scale these concepts for implementation across the state. The 5 pilot project concepts, which I will discuss next, will also be presented at workshops that had been mentioned before. These workshops are scheduled for Northern California, Central California, and Southern California between January 26th, tomorrow, and February 1st. There's also a planned webinar on February 5th to catch all those folks that may not be able to make it to those workshops. The first pilot project concept, is a food consolidation and distribution hub in Northern California. The concept includes developing a loading facility to consolidate agricultural freight for delivery using clean trucks and rail. The facility would incorporate charging infrastructure to support zero-emission vehicles and equipment and utilize renewable, low-carbon energy wherever possible. The second concept is a set of strategies for addressing urban freight congestion in the Bay Area. These strategies include shifting deliveries to off-peak periods, providing collaborative logistics, providing truck parking and charging within the urban area, and using cargo bicycles for last-mile delivery. The project would also include a local workforce and job development component. The third concept is a dairy biogas production and fueling facility for freight trucks in the San Joaquin Valley. The concept involves construction of new dairy digesters and renewable compressed natural gas fueling stations to convert dairy biogas into renewable CNG for use for freight fleets serving both the San Joaquin Valley and the LA Basin. The fourth concept is development of a truck-only lane in Southern California. This concept includes intelligent transportation systems, connected vehicle technologies that explore incentive provisions for zero and near-zero emission trucks, and truck platooning. And finally, the last concept, the fifth concept, is a dedicated zero-emission truck fast lane at the U.S.-Mexico border to allow for faster inspection and processing of trucks. Faster throughput means less idling and hence less emissions. For next steps, the state agencies will continue to gather feedback and information on these concepts during the public workshops and webinar and other stakeholder processes that we have in place. Additional information will be collected regarding the potential for inclusion of advanced vehicle and equipment technologies, ITS, and low-carbon energy sources. Furthermore, potential impacts of these concepts as they relate to the objectives set by the executive order will also be further evaluated. In terms of future steps, identified projects will need to be more tightly defined and evaluated for feasibility. Pilot projects will be included in the final action plan along with actions that each agency can take to support the pilot projects. Those actions may include things like helping build partnerships across silos and support technical analysis and potential funding sources. No specific funding has been identified or dedicated to these pilot projects at this time. However, Caltrans, ARB, and the Energy Commission may have funding that can support aspects of the pilot projects consistent with the requirements of each fund source. Initiating work on the pilot projects will include identifying projects meeting the executive order requirements and agency objectives, identifying potential partners and resources, specifying actions, maybe even overcoming barriers that may arise, coupled with commitment by each agency involved to collaborate and cooperate in efforts to make progress towards successful implementation. With that, I will conclude my remarks, and Ms. Avis will talk about the process and timelines.
Ms. Abdus, welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today and talk about the California Sustainable Freight Action Plan. I'm Panarea Avdus, the Director of the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, and my comments will be focused on the process and timeline associated with developing the Sustainable Freight Action Plan. Last July, Secretaries Kelly, Rodriguez, and Laird launched the development effort for the California Sustainable Freight Strategy at the California Freight Advisory Committee with ARB, CEC, Caltrans, and GoBiz. Mr. Chair, I understand that you were in attendance, and thank you for your participation. Since then, state agency partners have been working in close collaboration to build off previous successes and accelerate movement towards a sustainable freight transport system. We've held approximately 80 meetings with stakeholders, participated in the California Freight Advisory Committee and the Freight Efficiency Think Tank. A public webinar held in October introduced the effort to the public. Staff provided an overview of the plan development process, proposed content, and sought public input on what potential actions, including measures, incentives, funding, and partnerships that will be needed to develop a sustainable freight transport system in California. Participants included representatives from seaports, shippers, carriers, the fuel industry, utility companies, air districts and consultants, governments and transportation agencies, private businesses, and legislative staff. At the October California Freight Advisory Committee meeting, state agencies shared the draft targets for the action plan, discussed a process for evaluating economic impacts of actions that the agencies will identify to support those targets, and provided additional information regarding the process by which stakeholders may share pilot project ideas with state agencies. Caltrans has also convened a freight efficiency think tank chaired by Dr. Sperling, the director of the Institute for Transportation Studies at UC Davis. The group of freight experts from academia, industry, and government are examining broad-based approaches to increase the efficiency of the freight system while reducing its emissions. The working group is helping to identify a set of efficiency strategies along with the necessary action items to develop those strategies. Meetings have been held in August, October, and December. The next is scheduled for February. Similarly, GoBiz has been an active convener of interested parties and solicited ideas and advice through group and individual meetings with the CEOs of ports, rail companies, trucking companies, warehousing interests, and air freight companies. GoBiz has additionally reached out to the local economic development corporations, cargo owners, retail establishments, and small freight haulers. The collective input of these stakeholders has been extremely informative. In the coming months, GoBiz will advise these stakeholders as they assess the economic impacts of the proposed state actions to their specific operations and to the larger freight industry. An informational update was provided to ARB's board last week on the activities taking place with respect to the development of the action plan. We have also just launched a multi-agency website for this effort, which is www.californiasustainablefreightactionplan.org. Moving forward, the multi-agency team will hold public workshops at several locations in northern, central, and southern California, followed by a webinar. January 26th will be in Sacramento, Oakland, and Redding. January 28th will be in Fresno, Modesto, Bakersfield, and Monterey. February 1st will be in Wilmington, San Bernardino, San Diego, and El Centro, and February 5th will be the webinar. Multi-agency staff will provide an overview of the process for preparing the action plan and its envisioned content, as well as seek public input on what actions, investments, and partnerships are needed to develop a sustainable freight transportation system. The next Freight Advisory Committee meeting will be convened on February 10th, and it is an opportunity to provide an update on the workshops and share comments received. The committee includes government, industry, and environmental advocates. We will continue meeting with stakeholders as they have questions and input. We anticipate releasing the draft action plan in the spring for public review and comment. We plan to provide informational updates at the ARB board and other state board meetings in May to discuss the draft action plan and offer additional opportunities for public comment. We anticipate transmitting the final plan to the governor's office in July of this year. We are committed to working with and engaging stakeholders across the state as we continue to move forward, and we are committed to having public and transparent dialogue on the Sustainable Freight Action Plan as it moves forward in its development. Similarly, we look forward to continuing to work with our colleagues in the legislature, including this committee, as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any of the members of the committee have any questions for the panelist? Seeing that they don't, I do. Mr. Secretary, again, thank you for coming here today. I think you make a good point about Prop 1B. We've all acknowledged it was a wonderful opportunity. Having addressed both the infrastructure and the environment, well, the funding source was a single source. The investments made based on they were made on a single plan. They were not, made based on a single plan. Most will say TCIF was a great program. Why should we now change it to a single integrated investment plan going forward?
Mr. Chairman, I think, as I mentioned in my opening, is that whether or not it's 10 plans, 10 different plans that you want to steal from, as Prop 1B referenced, numerous plans that were available in 2005, 6, and 7 to invest. The opportunity here is to try to express the singular vision about freight and trade system in California. I don't think every idea for what you invest in is ultimately going to come out of just this vision plan, but it's an opportunity to put together work that CARB has been doing, work that the Energy Commission is doing, work that Caltrans is doing, that my agency is doing, and try to find a voice to put those things together and describe the objectives you're trying to achieve through trade policy. And so that's the opportunity, that's the challenge the governor gave us in producing the plan, and that's what we're intending to do.
Okay. So we've heard that the FAST Act provides roughly about $6 billion over 5 years in formula funds for states to implement their freight plans. How does the administration plan to implement this new program? And would the funding flow through the existing trade corridor? Would it go through the existing trade corridor investment improvement fund?
As you know, Mr. Chairman, the governor signed legislation 2 years ago to continue the Trade Corridor Improvement Fund. Senator Ben Hueso carried the legislation. With respect to the FAST Act dollars, that's a conversation that's ongoing right now, both with stakeholders and the administration and others. I would imagine some portion of that is certainly going to go through the TCIF process. I think it's also might be wise to make sure that we are directing funds to the highest priority needs around the state. We want to make sure that we capture that in any way. So I know that's a conversation that's ongoing between the department and stakeholders, but I would expect that the TCIF will be a beneficiary of some of those funds.
Thank you. Mr. Oglesby, can you help me understand what CEC is doing to ensure that the electricity grid can handle full zero-emission port operations, and what the cost could be for this, including all these additional plugins that we're forecasting? Now, I know there's an interconnectivity problem between north and south about being able to supply demand, and so we've put this big burden on these entities. And I know, because I worked with the CEC as the mayor of my city, trying to do a power plant that augmented renewable energy, and was fought and eventually just given up on. So what are we doing to make sure that we can have the ability to sustain this mandate?
Well, I think that's one of the strengths that the Energy Commission brings to this process, because we do have the analytical skills to work with our sister agencies that also get involved, because the electrical infrastructure supporting the ports comes from a number of different types of utilities. Some are subject to investor-owned utilities, and some are publicly owned utilities. So as we've been working with the ports through this process, we're helping them assess what it would take and make decisions on the choices, or understand better the choices. Some of the ports, for example, are very interested in improving their resiliency by having on-site generation as well as microgrids. So we're having some discussions and trying to go through that process. So where we are right now is an evaluation phase, and we've made the relationships with the ports, and we're meeting with them regularly to have the dialogue.
Mr. O'Donnell, do you have a question for the panel?
Yes.
Please go.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your presence here today. And I do want to note your rather historic and heroic efforts over the last, probably 12 years to clean up the port's infrastructure. I represent the 70th Assembly District, which covers both the L.A. and Long Beach ports. So I watch this this stuff closely for my ports and for the associated goods movement infrastructure. And just a couple comments, and you've broached it, but make me feel comfortable with the stakeholder input. That's a big concern of mine, because that's what I'll hear a lot about before something like this and after something like this is implemented. Can you just, one of you, two of you, talk about the stakeholder input so I have a comfort level with regard to the outreach and the input you received?
Sure, member. So leading up to the discussions that the workshops that will be beginning this week, we've had hundreds of meetings with a series of stakeholders, industry, environmental, and others, to get input, ideas, suggestions, the type of documentation we should be looking at, the analysis, for instance, on technology, what technologies are available, where there are improvements, where there are costs. All that has converged on this next phase, which is the workshop process. We're doing a series of workshops this week and next to get as much input as we can in terms of the approach, the opportunities, the concerns, the issues in terms of cost, time horizon, some of the points that Chairman Frazier made. The next step from that will be a release of a draft action plan that identifies potential actions, that provides the underlying assumptions and analysis associated with the documentation, a public process in terms of getting input on that draft, and based on that input, revisions to that draft, and that full-on engagement. And even ultimately, after the completion of the action plan, that's just another milestone. It's an important milestone. I don't want to minimize it. But the process going forward in terms of any individual action has its own public process in terms of crafting, developing, refining an approach. So the public workshops beginning tomorrow are an important step, but it's a milestone amongst many along the way to ensure that we're hearing from everyone, that we're documenting that input, that we're being very clear in terms of any recommendations that we make in terms of impacts, trade-offs, and even the right vehicle and prioritization.